Hello and welcome to BBC World News. We start with some breaking news, and we understand that there have been reports from Kyiv that Russia has launched more than 30 missiles into Ukraine this morning, and a little bit more on that via the Reuters news agency, showing that an air raid has been declared, an air raid alert has been declared by Ukraine over most of the country. They'd been warning of a possible missile attack, and we have now got confirmation, local reports that there have been a series of missiles fired by Russia into Ukrainian territory. So this all comes just a day after the US and Germany agreed to send battle tanks to the country. President Zelensky has welcomed the decision to send those tanks. The White House announced that it would provide Kyiv with 31 Abrams tanks. Berlin said it would send 14 Leopard tanks. The BBC's Robin Brandt reports.
For months, he's campaigned for these, in public and intensely behind the scenes diplomatically. Now Ukraine's leader is going to get this powerful, reliable and potentially transformative bit of kit.
The key now is speed and volume, the speed of training our military, the speed of supplying tanks to Ukraine, the volume of tank support. We have to form a fist of tanks, a fist of freedom, after which tyranny will not rise again. We can do it together.
On social media, he'd already thanked Germany for what he called these important and timely decisions. But it took a long time. Germany's leader, Olaf Scholz, has long been hesitant. He's balancing between a reliance on Russia for his country's energy needs, with pressure from within and neighbouring countries to give Ukraine the boost it needs. In the end, it was likely this helped. President Biden announced that the US will also send tanks.
Putin expected Europe and the United States to weaken our resolve. He expected our support for Ukraine to crumble with time. He was wrong. He was wrong.
His key aim to keep Ukraine well stocked, but also NATO and the West united against Russian aggression.
This war is evolving, and NATO allies have constantly assessed what type of support that they should provide. President Putin made a big mistake when he invaded Ukraine because he totally underestimated the Ukrainians. But he also made a big mistake because he totally underestimated NATO and NATO allies and our unity, our resolve to stand by Ukraine, to support Ukraine with an unprecedented level of military support.
But despite enduring almost a year of this, the kit deemed so essential to helping Ukraine isn't going to arrive quickly. Soldiers need to be trained in how to use those German-made tanks, and there are reports the US hardware could take a year to come. With the tanks promised, Ukraine's leader is already talking about what he needs next.
We also have to open up the supply of long-range missiles for Ukraine. It's important that we expand our cooperation in artillery and the supply of aircraft for Ukraine. This is a dream, and this is a task, an important task for all of us.
This war, almost a year old now, is escalating. More countries are giving more kit to Ukraine as it tries to turn the tide against Russia. Robin Brandt, BBC News.
OK, just to remind you then, breaking news coming to us from Ukraine. There have been reports of more than 30 missiles that have been fired at Ukraine. To follow on from that, the Reuters news agency, via military officials in Kyiv, has said that Ukraine has shot down all of the cruise missiles that were fired at Kyiv. The threat has not yet passed, though. So all of this coming just as the US and Germany had said that they will be sending the Abrams and Leopard tanks. Air raid alert was declared in preparation for this assault by Russia. So let us get the latest on this. We're going to speak to our correspondent on the ground, James Waterhouse in Kyiv.
Well, I should first off say that we are down in the underground car park because there are air raid sirens across much of Ukraine this morning because of more drones being detected in the air from the southeast. So it's another day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Nevertheless, the timing of these tank announcements have been described as timely by President Zelensky. This is something for the past few months he has very much banged the drum for. It was his 45th birthday yesterday. This is the dream present, but it's something he's not going to be able to unwrap for months, if not longer. If you look at the American Abrams tank, they're going to need to come with support vehicles, ammunition, spare parts, but also the White House admitted that it doesn't have any spares in stock, which means they will have to be sourced from private companies or other countries themselves. That's the difference between the Abrams and the German Leopard tank, where there are several Western allies, other countries, who have them and are willing to donate them to Ukraine. So both models could arrive at different times, but what this is it's significant for the potential, because finally battle tanks could arrive, and they could arrive in the numbers that Ukraine wants. It said it wants 300 to beat Russian forces in the east, but with spring around the corner and with fears of the Russians using an improvement in conditions for further offensives, Ukraine wants these tanks as soon as possible.
Yeah, just sticking to the timing there, James, how likely is it, and is there an expectation that Russia is going to exploit that void whilst Ukraine waits for those tanks?
I don't think it's a void created by the absence of tanks. I think what we're seeing is, certainly around the city of Bakhmut, which we've talked about a lot, haven't we, in the past few weeks, we have seen Russian mercenary fighters throw everything at trying to take this city, which still is in Ukrainian hands. The argument here in Kyiv is that tanks will allow them to do more than just hold the defensive line. Kyiv doesn't want to just keep defending for year after year. Kyiv wants to cross those front lines and force Russian tanks out completely. The US is keen to stress battle tanks aren't an offensive measure against Russia, but they are designed for that. They are designed to force troops back and attack enemy positions. So for Ukraine, they are seen as the key, the way to achieve its dream goal in this war of forcing Russia out completely. Sure enough, the Kremlin has responded, describing the declarations as dangerous, and in the words of Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, he said these tanks will burn like all of the other foreign ones. So it's got the reaction you would expect, but we are at a point now where the West feels confident enough to give what is an extremely efficient and deadly weapon to Ukraine.
And that was James Waterhouse speaking to us earlier. Well, our Europe correspondent Jessica Parker has the view from Berlin.
Germany was seen as really key to unlocking this issue of trying to get some more modern Western battle tanks to Ukraine. Why? Because it manufactures these Leopard 2 tanks, which are widely used across Europe. And not only, therefore, did Germany have to give permission to send some of its own, obviously at the moment it's pledged 14, it also has the final say in whether other countries can re-export those tanks to Ukraine as well. So one country in particular, Poland, which is an extremely strong supporter of Ukraine, had been publicly agitating to get Germany's permission in order to send 14 of its own Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine as well. And now the hope is from countries like Poland, other nations across Europe who have these Leopard 2s will also start sending them, so that you can build up enough to actually make this a potential game changer, although it really does depend on how many tanks are sent to Ukraine on the battlefield. So Germany really was seen as key. And of course, for Germany, it has been coming under huge amounts of criticism for what many felt was hesitation by Olaf Scholz to make this decision. And there were concerns, I think, amongst Western allies that it was opening up rather obvious splits as well. So I think there'll be relief that Olaf Scholz made this move yesterday, but it's pretty clear that for him, he really wanted to ensure that America was making a similar gesture with its Abrams tanks before he made any pledge on the Leopard 2. So he made that announcement yesterday, but really interestingly, he very much focused in his speech in the Bundestag trying to reassure worried citizens, because opinion in Germany here is split as to whether this is the right thing to do.
Well, away from the battlefield, there is also that matter of diplomacy, isn't there? And we saw in that report there by Robin Brandt, Jens Stoltenberg reacting and underscoring what this meant and the message that NATO was sending.
Yeah, and I think Jens Stoltenberg welcoming this decision because, as I was just mentioning and as you're referring to, this issue of diplomacy, there had been these concerns that basically some allies were publicly fighting over this. I mean, Poland, as I say, was really voicing its annoyance. And then, in fact, there were splits obvious as well in Olaf Scholz's own coalition government. And there was the meeting last Friday in Ramstein where all these defence chiefs, including the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin, was there, and this big question as to whether there'd be an agreement on tanks, and then there wasn't. So I think there was a lot of pressure to try and rebuild some unity around this issue in order to try and send a strong signal to Moscow. So I think for Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, that will be an important development this morning. And I think for Germany, though, actually when you speak to some people here, there's also a sense of irritation because actually Germany is one of the main suppliers of military aid to Ukraine over the last year, but it has consistently been accused still of being quite hesitant to make the first move, not wanting to take a leadership role. So some people feel that Germany has actually damaged its international reputation, despite eventually coming to the conclusion that it would indeed send Leopard 2 tanks and allow other countries to do so.